Thanks so much, Andrew. Yes, good evening. We do have an exclusive interview tonight with Trump insider Steve Bannon. He reveals how US Ambassador Kevin Rudd is trying to worm his way into the former president's good books. You don't want to miss that. An unspeakable murder, and yet Queensland Premier Stephen Miles is resisting tougher laws. Opposition leader David Crisafulli will join me to tell me why. An apology from a Greens politician, what a novelty, for claiming the Jews have their tentacles in everything. Can you get more anti-Semitic? And Prince Harry reunites with his sick father, but not his brother. We'll get the latest from our man in London. First tonight, the Albanese government is set for a tense relationship with Donald Trump's administration should he return to the White House. Steve Bannon, a confidant of Trump's, tells me tonight in an exclusive interview that Australia's ambassador to Washington, Kevin Rudd, has been trying to worm his way into the Trump inner circle, but that Trump has a long memory.
Ambassador Rudd should know that we got his number. I mean, Rudd is, for people in the United States, folks in Australia should know, Rudd, puts himself out as the expert in the world on China and the Chinese Communist Party. I think he's been dead wrong so many times. He is trying to worm his way back into the good graces. He's been very critical of President Trump in the past.
This comment backs up reporting by Cameron Stewart in The Australian that Kevin Rudd is working overtime to build bridges with Trump Republicans who'd be involved in a second Donald Trump presidency, despite his previous strident criticism of the former US president. And in that article recently, Joe Hockey said that Rudd had met with Mike Pompeo and former Trump National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, two figures who'll now be working closely with another former Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. Now, you'll recall that Anthony Albanese insisted he wasn't going to make Rudd Australia's Washington ambassador. And then, after the election, that's exactly what he did. There were concerns because the ambassador needs to have a good relationship with both sides of politics. And Rudd has called Trump nuts and said he was the most destructive president in history. In a tweet, Rudd said he drags America and democracy through the mud. He thrives on fomenting, not healing, division. He abuses Christianity, church and Bible to justify violence, all aided and abetted by Murdoch's Fox News network in America, which feeds this. That Kevin Rudd's tweet. So Steve Bannon's comments in my interview that's coming up a bit later tonight indicate that the Albanese government has cause for concern should Trump win the election later this year. Now, Bannon also spoke about the push by the Democrats to allow illegal immigrants to vote in the US election. Bannon said it could very well change the outcome in November. He also said Trump's looking for a female VP, and he spoke about the likelihood of Michelle Obama running on a ticket with Gavin Newsom. He also said that Trump would be committed to Australia having nuclear-powered submarines.
I strongly believe President Trump will pick a woman as his vice president. If Biden was to magically go away, Kamala Harris would lose to Trump by 30 points. They want the Democratic establishment and their base. They want Michelle Obama. They would love to have Gavin Newsom. Unfortunately, there's no convening authority to make those billets open. I think President Trump is a very strong advocate. It's the people around him at the highest levels are very strong advocates of really working with our ally, Australia.
All right, look, we're going to go now. That interview, by the way, is coming up a bit later in the show. But now I want to talk about this shocking murder on Sunday night of Queensland Ipswich grandmother, Mrs. White. This was not only an outrageous and violent murder, but we learnt today that the 16-year-old who's been charged with the murder was out on bail at the time that he killed this lovely grandmother, Vilene. He allegedly fatally stabbed her in the chest as she was going about her weekend. He should have been locked up. Police had opposed bail, and yet it was granted in court. Despite this, the Queensland Premier Stephen Miles said his government had no plans to introduce tougher youth justice laws before the October Queensland state election.
So we could see more law changes between now and the October election? Not that are under consideration right at this time, but I've consistently said that we will take the advice of the police and make sure they have the laws and the resources that they need.
It is simply nonsensical that Stephen Miles has no plans for tougher youth justice laws when police and victims of crime advocates are incredibly frustrated at the bail laws. They say that too many high-risk teenagers are granted bail just because they're 16 or under. Voice for Victims campaigner Ben Cannon told the Courier Mail he's terrified of how this trend escalates with kids just aged 15 committing crimes that were once the domain of adults. And former Gold Coast Police Superintendent Jim Keogh said that new laws are needed to remove offenders from society in the interest of community safety. He says that violent crimes, like what happened on the weekend against Vilene, are committed on bail and they're happening again and again and again.
Here we are, some years later, and I think up to 30 people have been killed by juvenile gangs, but we're not seeing the same legislative response. You've got to come up with harsh legislation. You're going to have to bring in legislation that is mandated through law to say, OK, if you repeat offence, if you commit an offence on bail, you will be taken to a secure facility.
Look, this is clearly unacceptable, the status quo. Vilene's alleged attacker should have been locked up, but he was free not only to commit theft again, but worse. He allegedly killed Vilene, as you know, in front of her granddaughter. At just 6 years old, she'll now likely be traumatised for life. So how can the Queensland Premier rule out tougher laws when clearly the police and victims of crime groups say they're desperately needed? And this just a day after he did laugh during a question about youth crime from my colleague Adam Walters in Queensland.
The absence of any reference to youth crime in your speech to the Queensland Media Club would have been noted by more than a few, including the people of those communities. Premier, I'm sure you concede the last 2 summers have been bookended.
And Stephen Miles in a tweet today said he didn't laugh, but you just saw it right there. Now, the Premier did concede that it wasn't good enough for magistrates to stop the media from reporting on the children's court proceedings of criminals like the one who allegedly killed Vilene. In total, 5 teens have been charged in relation to this incident, and they're all 15 and 16 years old. One magistrate who blocked media coverage yesterday claimed he was worried about the child's well-being.
Will your government amend the law so that the fundamental tenet of open justice is reflected in the Children's Court?
We haven't considered this as a government policy, but my opinion is that where reporters can be in those courts, I think magistrates should let them. And I think at the moment magistrates are erring too much on the side of not allowing journalists in.
The Queensland opposition leader David Crisafulli says it's Labor that closed the Children's Court and that we need tougher laws to stop this from happening to other families. And he's going to join me in just a moment. Now, today in Senate question time, Shadow Finance Minister Jane Hume attacked the government Senate leader Penny Wong on the lack of honesty from the Albanese government after the broken promise on Stage 3 tax cuts.
Will you now apologise on behalf of the Prime Minister for the deliberate way in which you have misled the Australian people?
You used words like this was such a betrayal, a treachery, a trickery. All of these things are betrayal, and now you're voting for it.
Cabinet, and
that is not a point of order.
You broke your own rules.
How are they supposed to believe a coalition that actually is complaining about a change they're voting for? They're voting for. How are they supposed to believe that? And how are they supposed to believe that you're the party of lower taxes?
And that was in the Senate. It was equally heated in the lower house, where the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, mocked what he called the Churchillian approach of Deputy Liberal leader Susan Ley to the tax changes.
I'm asked by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, of all people, about tax policy and about consistency. Tax policy and consistency. the person who stood up before we'd even announced our new tax policy and said, we will fight this legislation in the Parliament. We don't even know what it will look like. You know, we'll fight them on the beaches. It was Churchillian, Mr Speaker. Churchillian. They'll fight it on the beaches until the tide changes. And then their commitments just get washed away in a week. Washed away, Mr Speaker.
It's a sitting week in Canberra, so let's bring in our political panel, National Senate Leader Bridget McKenzie and Labor MP Andrew Charlton. Great to see you both. Hope you're in fine form tonight because it was certainly a fiery question time today. Tax cuts, of course, the main focus. Also the broken promise, with Peter Dutton claiming the Prime Minister is the liar from the lodge. Andrew, this is a brutally effective slogan, isn't it?
Well, Sharri, the most important issue facing Australian families is the cost of living. Families are worried about being able to pay the rent, being able to afford groceries. So the Prime Minister took a decision when he saw a better way to deliver more tax relief to more people. But if we want to talk about honesty and words and trust, your viewers need to know that just today, Peter Dutton has been saying out of one side of his mouth that these are terrible changes to the tax system, and out of the other side of his mouth, he's been saying that he will vote for them. That is the real duplicity in Australian politics today.
Bridget, this is the main line of attack that we've heard from Albanese today, that, you know, the coalition has changed its mind on the tax policy and is criticising it, yet also supporting it. What's your response to this?
You know, I think your viewers just saw the Prime Minister joking in question time about breaching faith with the Australian people. He promised 97 times that he was committed to the stage 3 tax cuts. He's done the backflip. And I think the public knows that whilst of course they need to be keeping more of their own hard-earned money, and we're always going to be the side of politics that backs lower, simpler and fairer tax system, 100% of Australians hate being lied to. And I think that's the great tragedy that Labor refuses to accept. They seem to think that they can get away with giving Australians more of their money back without significant tax reform to the bracket creep that's hurting Australians. And Andrew makes a great point. Australians are hurting. They're making decisions not to send kids to swimming lessons, ballet lessons, etc., whilst they struggle to pay mortgages. And that's because these tax cuts do nothing to actually address inflation. Labor's added $209 billion additional spending to their bottom line since coming to power, and that's exactly the wrong way to approach monetary policy. So I think Australians are going to welcome that relief, but will they trust this guy again? No way.
Yeah.
Sharri, if I could just jump in here, because
go ahead.
Bridget has just criticised these tax changes, but the question she has to answer for your viewers is, at the end of the day, will she be voting for Labor's changes or will she not? And if she is voting for them, which she is, then everything she has just said is just politics.
Bridget, very quickly.
Andrew, Sharri, and I hate to do this, but Andrew, wants to play politics. I'll tell you what, they handed down a May budget. They handed down an October 22 budget. None of those budgets mentioned changes to the stage 3 tax cuts. They went to my EFO prior to Christmas. They could have actually announced this change then around their changes to monetary policy. They didn't. You know why? Because the only thing that's changed is a by-election in Dunkley, and this is actually the Prime Minister and the government have trashed their reputation to win a by-election in southeast suburbs of Melbourne.
All right.
Bridget,
look, there's no doubt it's a broken promise
for these tax changes.
Let's move on to another controversial topic.
The question.
Tony Burke and the Prime Minister are pushing ahead with controversial legislation that's dubbed Right to Disconnect. This is quite fascinating legislation. It's an area that government doesn't usually intervene in. This is basically meaning that bosses can't contact workers after hours, and workers can actually contact the Fair Work Commission to get orders, formal orders, to stop their bosses from contacting them outside of official hours. You know, you wouldn't usually be seeing government setting legislation in an area like this. There has been a compromise, which is that employers can't be fined for breaches of the law. Andrew, look, you founded your own successful company. You'd be well aware of the pressures to respond to calls and emails outside of work. Do you think government should be intervening in business and how it operates like this?
I think it's about finding a reasonable balance. I mean, most people, I think, would agree that many of these new technologies like smartphones and other things have enabled us to have lots of great flexibility, which many of us enjoy and appreciate. But we have to make sure that these technologies don't mean that workers can't clock off at the end of the day and have some time to themselves and their family. So it's really just about finding a balance in response to a significant change in our workplaces. And that change is the ability of people to be contacted at any time. And we're finding the right balance to make sure that that change is a positive thing for people, for businesses and for workers.
What do you think about this, Bridget? I mean, is this intervening to too great an extent? Is this big government, or is this something that the coalition will be supporting?
Well, I think this is, you know, the price of a dirty deal done to get the most significant change done in our industrial relations law through the Senate. Right now, Sharri, you know, we are debating this IR change in the Senate. The government finally got the dirty deal with the Greens and Pocock this afternoon, so walked into the chamber, slammed on a motion to actually restrict debate tonight and restrict our ability to question the intricacies of this legislation because they've got the deal. And this is the price. Andrew's right, you do need a sensible balance, but that's something to be negotiated between employers and employees depending on the workplace. I'm very concerned about this legislation, and what I have seen from this Labor government is trashing the role of the Senate in terms of being the place where we look at the detail, we actually prosecute the intricacies. This change wasn't in the consultation papers with broader business. It's not even in the legislation that's before the Parliament right now. So it was not being contemplated by the government. It is something they've had to do to get a deal. And that means we're not going to actually be able to investigate this appropriately through a Senate inquiry, through the chamber, asking ministers sensible questions, because Labor doesn't care. They just need to pay their masters, the union movement, get the IR ledge through as soon as possible, and it's trashing democracy along the way.
And Tony Burke has been exposed through this process as being quite close to the unions. Now, the RBA, as you know, yesterday kept the cash rate on hold at 4.35%. But Governor Michelle Bullock warns that inflation is still too high. Rent, of course, is one area. Andrew, do you think, and the RBA couldn't give a firm prediction on this, but do you expect that rates might start falling this year?
Well, look, it's certainly welcome news for many Australians that rates were left on hold at the most recent meeting and were not put up. And, you know, one of the reasons for that is that we do have inflation coming down quite significantly. You know, let's remember the government has reduced the quarterly rate of inflation from 1.8% when Bridget's party gave up government, now down to 0.6%. So quarterly inflation has come down by 2/3. And that, of course, gives the RBA a lot more room to bring interest rates down over time, should circumstances permit that. And more broadly, people are benefiting from a fantastic set of economic circumstances across the macroeconomy. Unemployment is near record lows. The ASX is near record highs. Wages growth is at the fastest rate in 15 years, and we have the first budget surplus in 15 years. So this set of strong macroeconomic conditions shows that the government's plan has been working, and it will ultimately flow through to better standards of living for all Australians.
Bridget, do you give the government credit for the fact inflation is now falling?
Sharri, Andrew does a valiant attempt as an economist to actually, wash through what this government's actually done over the last 18 months. The Reserve Bank Governor, the independent Reserve Bank Governor, has said that inflation is now homegrown in this country. She's taking a very cautious response, as she should. And this week we saw the OECD come out and caution globally nations to actually be very cautious about lifting interest rates. So the government talks a big game, but right now, tonight, around kitchen tables in the country, they're struggling to pay their mortgage because the RBA has had to do the heavy lifting for the last 18 months on getting inflation under control because this government's done nothing to lift productivity. It's made it worse, particularly through these industrial relations policies, and also by increasing government spending, which are the two things that governments shouldn't be doing if you're wanting to actually get inflation under control.
All right.
We have the first surplus in 15 years. We have the surplus that the Liberals couldn't deliver has been delivered, and that reflects
thank you to the resources sector
fiscal management, which is helping to take pressure off interest rates.
You need to stop hitting them over the head. They're providing you your surplus.
All right, Bridget McKenzie, Andrew Charlton, thank you both so much. Now, look, let's return to the horrific killing of Ipswich grandmother Violene White on Saturday. The Queensland opposition leader, David Crisafulli, joins me now. Welcome, David. Look, this shocking death, grandmother just going about her business 6 o'clock on a Sunday evening, has shone a light on youth crime and how bad it's become in Queensland. What new laws are specifically needed now?
G'day, Sharri. The new laws are simple. We have to go back to the things that worked in the past and that this government watered down when they came into office in 2015. Things like removing the provision of detention as a last resort, things like making sure the court system is open so there's scrutiny. We need to get serious about gold standard early intervention. We have to fix the broken childcare, the resi care system in this state, and the Department of Child Safety needs the resources to do its job. We have to put victims ahead of the rights of the offender. There will be less victims under an LNP government because we are focused on that. And above all, we have to let the police know that they will have a government that has their back. Stronger laws, support for them and enabling them to do their job. Because at the moment in Queensland, there's 322 fewer police today than 18 months ago because they're leaving quicker than they can be replaced because they feel battered, broken and bruised.
So just specifically on, what's happened in this case, there was a 16-year-old boy who should have been in prison. Police opposed bail, but a court's allowed him to be free, despite the police recommendation. Obviously, police had reason to say that he should not be given bail. He was on the streets. He's now allegedly reoffended, allegedly murdered Violene White. So specifically in this area, what laws do you think need to change?
Well, when I talk about removing the provision of detention as a last resort, that is an absurd principle that is in the Youth Justice Act. And this government put it back in 9 years ago, and on the back of it, you've got a generation of untouchables, and they laugh at the law. So whenever you have this sitting above a magistrate that says detention must be a last resort, you're going to continue to see that churn time and time again. And I want to see consequences for action. I want to see the Act rewritten to put the rights of the victim ahead of the rights of the offender. And I just don't... I've seen the Premier say, we've got to throw the book at them. The problem is the book. The book is the Youth Justice Act, and this government watered it down. And sadly, Queenslanders right across the state are living the results of that right now.
And what about this issue of the magistrates stopping reporting of this alleged killer because of concerns for the privacy and well-being of children? I mean, children who, in one case, has been charged with murder.
Yep, Sharri, I believe in an open court system, and I believe in order for justice to be done, it's got to be seen to be done. And I'm determined to make sure that Queenslanders can see the reforms if we get the opportunity to govern. But let me go back to 2015 when this government was elected. They changed the laws. The laws were changed to make the Children's Court closed. So they can point their finger in all different directions, but they should be looking into the mirror. That's where the source of the problem is. The Act was changed. Now, I believe fundamentally that there should be the right for journalists to go in there because I believe in transparency. And I want to make sure that the eyes of the state can be on that. And I want to make sure that Queenslanders have faith in their judiciary and their justice system. And for the government, again, to cry crocodile tears at a decision by a magistrate when they are enforcing the laws of the day. And in the days of this government, the laws have never been worse.
All right. Queensland Opposition Leader David Crisafulli, thank you for your time this evening. Now, coming up after the break, Kevin Rudd's trying to win favour with Trump's inner circle. In an exclusive interview, Steve Bannon, who's in that inner circle, tells us he's got Rudd's number. And more Israeli hostages than we thought have been killed in Gaza, and yet still the Greens only want to condemn Israel. Stay tuned. Well, Nikki Haley remains the main alternative to Donald Trump for the Republican nomination, but she lost the Nevada Republican primary to an option on the ballot box called None of These Candidates. Media are widely reporting that it's an embarrassing blow to her campaign. Donald Trump wasn't even on the ballot that saw Haley come second with 30% of the votes to None of These Candidates and their 63% share. All eyes are now on the frontrunner Trump to see whether he'll consider Nikki Haley for his vice president running mate. One man who knows how his mind works is former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon, who I spoke to a little earlier today. Steve Bannon, terrific to have you on the show again.
Always love to do the show. Love your show. We watch it all the time.
Well, let's start with the biggest issue right now. The Democrats have been unwilling to sort out this catastrophic border issue, and now it looks like illegals might be able to vote in the American election. Is this effectively allowing foreigners to vote, and could it change the outcome of the presidential election in November?
Well, it could. I think that, listen, it definitely would. This presidential election, President Trump's winning everywhere, right? But we know it's going to tighten up. This will come down just like in 2020 and just like in 2016 to a handful of battleground states, a couple of 100,000 votes each way. The Democrats, remember, just not to totally blame the Democrats, the business community wants these people in for cheap labor and also for bigger internal consumer markets. So the business community's in back of this. The radical Democrats want new voters, right? And particularly voters from other countries that would be opposed to the MAGA agenda. If they were allowed to vote, it would definitely tip the election towards Biden and the radical Democrats. That's why it's been one of the reasons it's been such a firestorm against this. And it also shows you, it should show people in Australia, the international corporate business community has allegiance to no country. They have allegiance to their own profits.
Now, I know you've had a lot to say about who you think Donald Trump should have as his VP running mate. What's your tip? Who are the leading candidates?
I believe there's such a deep bench of Republican women that I'm strongly advocating that he look at this deep bunch of Republican women, people like Elise Stefanik in the House, people like Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, Blackburn, a senator from Tennessee, Governor Sanders down in Huckabee Sanders down in Arkansas, even people like MTG in the House, the firebrand MTG. We have, I think, 10 or 12 women. I strongly believe President Trump will pick a woman as his vice president.
Steve, what about this report that Michelle Obama could be planning to run, that Biden could be stepping down around May? Do you think this is credible?
People in Australia should understand that if the Democrats had a mechanism to do it, they would immediately have the ticket of Michelle Obama and Governor Gavin Newsom of California. The problem they have, given how they illegitimately stole the 2020 election, there is no mechanism within the Democratic Party. They're not really having a primary, as you've seen. It's all phony. There's no mechanism to extract not just Biden, but Kamala Harris. Remember, if Biden was to magically go away, Kamala Harris would lose to Trump by 30 points. They want the Democratic establishment and their base. They want Michelle Obama. They would love to have Gavin Newsom. Unfortunately, there's no convening authority to make those billets open. Even if there was something that was happening to Biden, or somehow they could remove Biden or something with his son or step down for health reasons, they still have Kamala Harris, and she's dug in pretty hard.
Steve, the AUKUS deal is critical for Australia because of the threat from China in our region, and China's only getting more aggressive. Do you think that Donald Trump, as president, would stand firm on the AUKUS deal and commit to nuclear-powered submarines for Australia? Because I know there have been some concerns among Republicans about the deal.
I think President Trump is a very strong advocate. It's the people around him at the highest levels are very strong advocates of really working with our ally, Australia. I said a number of years ago we were going to end up in a shooting war in the South China Sea. It's only gotten scarier and scarier and scarier as we go on. This deal has to happen. We have to cement our relationship with Australia. There's no better way to do it than with fast attack submarines, with all the nuclear technology it has and all the great firepower it has. This is absolutely critical to our alliance. I think you'll see President Trump and the senior national security team around him ultimately back this deal. Yes.
Look, speaking of China, it's unbelievable that we still haven't had an inquiry into the origins of COVID 4 years on. Do you think that Donald Trump, if he becomes president, would hold a COVID-19 commission of inquiry so that we can actually find out what research the US was funding and what actually happened in Wuhan?
We've got to basically make sure that we have an alliance that can stop the Chinese Communist Party's aggression on every level. It was your really coming on War Room back, I think, in 20 and 21, 22. Also your book that I think initiated so much incredible interest. I don't think there's any question that upon President Trump taking the White House, that we will have a presidential commission that will get to the bottom and to find out and expose to the American people what involvement of certain rogue scientists, rogue officials, rogue agencies in the United States in business with the Chinese Communist Party. I think you're going to see it definitely. And I would tell your audience that the people in the United States owe a tremendous debt of gratitude for you, for your investigative reporting and your book. And the New York Post, as you know, did an amazing job of rolling it out. So I want to thank you. And this inquiry is going to come. It's going to be more shocking, I think, to the American people than the 9/11 Commission.
That's so kind, Steve. I really appreciate your generous words. But, you know, we look at the news of Donald Trump. There's multiple criminal cases, civil cases. How's he going to shake these off in the run for the presidency?
The only way that they can stop him is what we call lawfare. They're coming at, and just so your audience understands, the criminal cases against him add up to 700 years in prison. 700 years in prison. In New York, in a state court, they're stripping his entire $7 billion property company away from him. They're now on the Supreme Court. We're going to have an argument this week at the Supreme Court about 20 states, Democrat states, want to take him off the ballot so he can't even run in 2024. Lawfare is the only way the Democrats can win. In fact, today, just a few hours ago, we had a historic ruling by the D.C. Appellate Court on immunity. You know, is he immune from being prosecuted for criminal charges on J6? They ruled unanimously that he did not have immunity. The NBC News poll the other day, even NBC said a presidency in peril, talking about Biden. The only way they do it, at the end of the poll, they said, well, there is some good news for Democrats. If Trump is convicted of a federal crime, a felony, he would lose to Biden right now by only 2 points. If President Trump was even convicted of one of these felonies, he would win by, I think, at least 3 to 5 points. This is the reason we're having these huge fights in the Supreme Court. They're trying to quick march this so they actually have a trial on Trump in the summer before Election Day.
Well, Steve, is this why Nikki Haley's hanging on?
Yes. For your audience, Nikki Haley is hanging in because the donors, remember, there's still 15% or 20% of the Republican Party, the old Republican Party, the Bushes. They believe that if she hangs around, if something happens to Trump legally, she could step up. However, knowing that he's still beating her, what they're trying to do is force her on the ticket as vice president. Remember, I told you a woman would probably be the most attractive draw here. I think she's looking at that. Number two, if she can't get that, she might be Secretary of Defense or somehow force her way in with the donor money. She's raising an incredible amount of money. She just raised $16 million in January, an incredible amount of money, and it's not slowing down.
Look, just finally, Kevin Rudd is Australia's ambassador in Washington. He's been critical of Donald Trump in the past. What do you think the relationship will be like with him as our ambassador?
Ambassador Rudd should know that we got his number. I mean, Rudd is, for people in the United States, folks in Australia should know, Rudd, puts himself out as the expert in the world on China and the Chinese Communist Party. I think he's been dead wrong so many times. He is trying to worm his way back into the good graces. He's been very critical of President Trump in the past. Look, I don't speak for President Trump, and I don't speak for the people in the inner circle around President Trump. I'm just a lowly newscaster now and podcaster. But I would tell you, I think it would be quite difficult. I think Rudd's attitude about the Chinese Communist Party, at least, is so different than the hardliners, right? Remember, The hardliners around President Trump or near President Trump, and President Trump doesn't agree with our theory of the case, but we're very adamant about it, is the Chinese Communist Party is not the legitimate government of the Chinese people. And I think it's people like Rudd that have gone out of the way to legitimize this regime, this murderous regime. What we fought for in World War II together as allies is still on the table today. And I would hope Ambassador Rudd took it as seriously as the hardline anti-CCP element in the United States.
Steve Bannon, always terrific to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining us and hope to have you on the program again soon.
Sharri, the audience in the United States loves you. They love the hard-hitting investigative reporting. Keep it up. Love the show.
Full of compliments. Well, still to come, a Greens politician has apologised for referencing a Nazi cartoon in her criticism of Jews. That is so anti-Semitic. She should have apologised. And Sydney Mardi Gras likely to be overrun by pro-Palestinian protesters. My panel is next. Welcome back. Well, pro-Palestinian protesters took to Parliament House lawn in Canberra today, calling for a ceasefire.
Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
Of course, no mention of hostages or Hamas. Why would anyone care about them? And in New South Wales, a Greens politician, Jenny Long, has apologised after footage emerged of her being clearly anti-Semitic.
The Jewish lobby and the Zionist lobby are infiltrating into every single aspect of what is ethnic community groups. They rock up and they're part of the campaign. They offer support for things like the campaign against the 18C racial vilification laws. They offer solidarity. They rock up to every community event and meeting to offer that connection because their tentacles reach in to the areas that try and influence power. And I think that we need to call that out and expose it.
It doesn't get more racist than that from a party that claims to be a party of diversity. Well, it's diversity for everyone, but not Jews. Well, joining me now is Victorian Liberal power broker Michael Kroger and former Labor Minister Graham Richardson. Look, Graham, I mean, if that was a coalition politician who had said similar comments about any other group, they would have had to resign or be sacked already.
Yeah, that's true, but not with the Greens. I mean, I thought it was disgraceful. I think any sane, sensible person would come to that conclusion pretty quickly. But with the Greens, insanity's not actually outlawed. In fact, sometimes it's embraced.
Look, Michael, Jenny Long, talking about tentacles of power, it's just such an ancient anti-Semitic trope. We just haven't seen the media outrage on this across the board.
That is disgusting. She makes me sick to hear her say that. That is disgusting. I mean, she should resign from Parliament, or the Greens should have the sheer decency to expel her from their party immediately. I mean, this sort of racism, I mean, it's very polite to say it's anti-Semitism. This is Jew hatred. These people hate Jews. There is a sickness in this country, as there is in the Western world. And post the end of the war in Gaza and post the resolution of these issues, there has to be a deep look in Western society at the hatred towards Jews that is emanating from the cultural left and some on the cultural hard right. The neo people dress up as Nazis because this sickness cannot continue in Western society any longer.
Yeah, no, very strong comments, Michael. And of course, you went to Israel, you saw it all firsthand, and you're, of course, to be commended for that. Now, this issue is also set to infect the Mardi Gras this year. Pro-Palestinian activists planning to overrun it. Graham, it doesn't look like it's going to be a safe place for anyone who supports Israel.
No, I think that's right. This anti-Semitism is just getting so bad now. I mean, I think we've just let it boil away underneath the surface for a while, but now it's just coming out everywhere, and we've just got to stamp on it really hard. Whatever you allow in a society, you can't allow that, and I think we must act a lot tougher than we've been. If you want to go on with an anti-Jewish tirade, we ought to do something about it. I mean, we ought to just put you away for a while. And that's what we don't do. What we do is we talk big, but we don't do much. We talk big and act little.
I mean, Michael, as I said, you were just in Israel. The hypocrisy of pro-Palestinian supporters, Mardi Gras pro-Palestinian supporters, how would they be treated if they were in Gaza?
Well, Tel Aviv is one of the great gay capitals of the world, and there is a gay pride march of Mardi Gras in Tel Aviv every year, and it's celebrated. And a lot of gay people there told me how much they love being in Israel because of its tolerance. There is not a gay Mardi Gras in any Arab country in the world. There has never been a gay Mardi Gras in Gaza or on the West Bank, by the way. And you know, what is so disappointing in otherwise thoughtful people who run an important event, which is the gay Mardi Gras in Sydney, the fact that they don't realise that most Palestinians hate you. Most Palestinians hate gay people. They hate them. They kill them. I mean, you know, in 2016, Hamas executed one of their own by firing squad because they suspected that he was gay. Mahmoud Ishtini, well-known Hamas commander, was killed by firing squad. A couple of years ago in Hebron, a young gay man, Ahmed Mukaya, another story of a young gay man who had gone to Israel to say he feared for his life in Hebron from his family and his neighbours because he was gay. And the Israelis were trying to help him and he was going to go to Canada. Before they could, this young man was beheaded. His torso was decapitated as well because gay people are hated. They are killed. And for the Mardi Gras, Sharri, for the Mardi Gras to have this, it's just shocking. Shocking.
It really is. It really is one of many things that have shocked us lately. Now, very quickly before we go, you're both long-term observers of politics. Graham, the Prime Minister, is firing up in Question Time. He's come out quite defiant after the broken promise that he made. Do you think he's managed to turn the tide on this?
Well, I think he's getting there. I don't think you turn the tide on these things quickly, but I think he's getting there. You know, he's always got the likeability factor, Albo. And that just carries him through a lot of trouble. And, you know, as long as he retains that, he's going to be very hard to beat.
Michael, very quickly, do you think Albanese has the likeability factor? Has he got it?
I don't think he does anymore. And firing up in the Parliament, as Graham knows better than me, never helped Gough Whitlam.
All right, Michael Kroger, Graham Richardson, thank you both so much. Now, after the break, Daily Mirror royal editor Russell Myers on Harry's return to the UK to see cancer-stricken King Charles, and an epidemic of fatal prescription drug overdoses is gripping Australia. It's a subject of a documentary. We'll give you new details in a moment. Welcome back. The King was all smiles during his first public sighting since his shock cancer diagnosis yesterday. King Charles pictured leaving Clarence House the day after starting his treatment and just minutes after his reunion with Prince Harry, who flew in from the US to see his father. The first time in 16 months they'd met face to face. Associate editor of the UK's Daily Mirror and co-host of the podcast Pod Save the King, Russell Myers, joins me now. Russell, great to see you again. Look, what do we know about why Harry's visit was so short?
Well, good evening, Sharri. Well, a very, very fleeting visit for Prince Harry seeing the King yesterday. I mean, it was an 11-hour journey over from Los Angeles, then a couple of hours to get across town, but only 30 minutes with the King. He saw him at his Clarence House home before the King was going to Buckingham Palace and then flying to Sandringham. And to be a fly on the wall in that meeting, as you said, the first time in 16 months since they'd had a face-to-face meeting. Harry was here 9 months ago for the coronation, but he was only here for a very, very short period of time, and he didn't get to spend any time with the King. So I think it speaks volumes of the seriousness of the King's condition that Harry was coming over to the UK, but certainly a very short meeting for them.
Look, Prince William is expected to step up performing royal duties while this treatment is continuing. He didn't see Prince Harry today, though.
No, certainly not. I mean, I revealed a story yesterday that there was absolutely no plans for Prince William to see his brother For Harry's part, he would have welcomed an opportunity to see his brother. I mean, he has said himself that he welcomes reconciliation between his father and his brother, but he wants some sort of accountability from their side, and that is certainly not going to be the case. So it may be for the king that he wants to sort of forgive and forget of Harry's various misdemeanours over the last few years, but certainly Prince William is in a very different space, and he's got a lot on his plate, going to be taking on extra duties, looking after the Princess of Wales, who is recuperating at home following her operation. So it's pretty stacked for William, and Harry is certainly not a part of his plans.
Yeah, and of course we're still waiting to find out more information about the King's diagnosis and what he's actually dealing with. Russell Myers, thank you very much for your time. Now, Australia is in the grip of what experts are calling a silent epidemic of fatal drug overdoses. It's claiming more lives every year than the national road toll, and hundreds of those deaths involve prescription medication. Now, tomorrow night, a special Sky News investigation delves into this, and Investigations reporter Taylor Auerbach has been working on this story and joins me now. Taylor, how bad is this problem? Have we got Taylor Auerbach?
There have been royal commissions called over a lot less. We've lost nearly 40,000 people to drug overdoses in this country in the last 2 decades. The majority of those were unintended, and a great many involved drugs that people sourced through scripts from their local GP. And according to our investigation, the notifications about doctors doing the wrong thing in this area have gone up about 50% in the last 3 years. But Sharri, before people become statistics, they're people. Mothers, fathers, people like Bradley Leafort, who was found dead in 2021, still holding the prescription opioids that had been prescribed to him by his doctors, despite them knowing he was an addict. And he's left behind 3 triplets and a wife, Linda
Terrible
Matthews.
Story.
And I'd like you to hear just how strong this woman is.
I don't want another mum or dad to have to explain to their kids why they don't have a parent. There shouldn't be somebody else that has to call the parents of your husband and explain to them that he's died, that he won't be coming home again. Nobody should have to do that, not when it can be preventable.
It's just so sad, Taylor. Like, this is a major issue in the United States, prescription medication causing deaths, but it hasn't been a big issue in Australia, and yet, as you say, more people are dying from it than even the road toll.
It's huge, Sharri, and in the case of Bradley, can you believe that the 11 doctors involved in treating him in the 6 months leading up to his death, Victorian coroner gave them a virtual leave pass, federal authorities gave them a virtual leave pass, but we weren't content with that. This is what happened when Sky News confronted Dr. Gregory Field with our cameras. I'd like to ask you about the death of Bradley Leafort, sir.
Sorry, I'm not talking to you.
No, this isn't one of those situations for a no comment, sir. What about Lockie, Scotty, Lila? His 3 triplets who will never have a father. 13 times you prescribed him dangerous drugs in the 6 months leading up to his death.
All right, such an important topic. Taylor, you've done a remarkable job. We're going to watch that tomorrow night, 8:30 on Sky News. Thank you so much for your company. I'll see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock. And here's Paul Murray, and I tell you, he's looking sharp tonight.